In this module, we will explain what a mapping document is, the consequences of not providing all pieces of assessment evidence to us, and we will answer a few commonly asked questions relating to missing assessment items. In this section, we will explain what a mapping document is. To be declared competent in a unit, a student must demonstrate that they are 100% proficient in 3 things which are listed in the training package on training.gov.au. These 3 things are the unit's performance criteria, performance evidence, and knowledge evidence. Knowledge evidence relates to theory, whereas the performance criteria and performance evidence relate to practical skills. When developing assessments, we make a mapping document, and that mapping document has 3 tables, one for knowledge evidence, one for performance evidence, and one for performance criteria. The evidence requirements for each table are copied over from training.gov.au so that each item is on a separate line down the left-hand side of the table. Across the top of the table, each of the columns represents an assessment tool. As our assessment tools are created, the assessment questions are mapped against the evidence requirements on the left-hand side to demonstrate specifically whereabouts in the assessment tools that particular requirement has been addressed. Every evidence requirement must be addressed somewhere in the suite of assessment tools. Often it may be the case that a single requirement has multiple parts and that these are addressed in different parts of the assessment. For example, in the unit PUA SAR 022, participate in a rescue operation, there is a performance evidence item requiring the student to demonstrate participating in and contributing to briefings and debriefings. These may be demonstrated in 2 separate assessments. For example, the briefing may be part of assessment 2, and then the debriefing may occur later on during assessment 3. In the event that we are investigated by the federal regulator, then we will use this mapping document to help us demonstrate that we have evidence that the student has demonstrated competency in all the requirements of the unit. In this section, we will look at the consequences of not providing all pieces of assessment evidence to us. Sometimes when we receive a student's assessment evidence, we are missing 1 or more items of evidence. Without all items of evidence, we might not be able to demonstrate that the student is competent in the entire unit. For example, on this mapping document, you can see that the 3 evidence requirements on the left-hand side are only addressed in Assessment 1. So if you do not submit Assessment 1, then we do not have the evidence that the student is competent in those things because those things are not covered in Assessment 2 or Assessment 3. The consequence of this is that we cannot issue the student's statement of attainment until we receive Assessment 1. If we were to go ahead and issue the statement of attainment, then there is a risk that the federal regulator may later on withdraw the student's statement of attainment, or make us reassess the student, or they might even take out sanctions against us and close our RTO down and transfer our students to another RTO. This has happened in the past when the federal regulator has come across situations where students have not been properly assessed. Another potential consequence of not retaining all of a student's assessment evidence is that later on you may have difficulty justifying your assessment decision to the coroner or to other government officials in the event of a death or a serious injury. A recent example of this occurred when the Queensland Coroner's Court investigated training as part of its inquest into the death of a German woman who was killed at Tamborine Mountain in 2017. During the investigation, it transpired that the person who rang 000 was not a native English speaker, and that the 000 operator had some difficulty in understanding him. The telephone operator who had answered the 000 call had previously completed a certificate for qualification with an RTO. As part of the inquest, the court reviewed the RTO's training and whether or not the training and assessment sufficiently covered the management of 000 calls from non-English speaking callers. Now, typically these formal investigations would happen in a coroner's court. However, they can also happen during other official inquiries, such as the Queensland Coal Mining Board of Inquiry that was held in the wake of the recent Grosvenor mine explosion. As you can imagine, if we were to issue a statement of attainment to a student without keeping a copy of all of their assessment evidence, then later on we may struggle to justify how that decision of competency was made. In this section, we will address some frequently asked questions relating to missing assessment evidence. The first question is, what evidence do I need to submit? As explained back in Module 2, you can find a list of all assessment evidence in the current TAS. Use this as a checklist when you are preparing to send a student's evidence to us. This will help you to double check that you have all the pieces of assessment evidence that are required to be submitted. The second frequently asked question is, why do I have to scan the evidence? Why can't I just post it instead? One reason is that we only have 30 days to issue a statement of attainment. Mailing the assessment to us via Australia Post may cause a significant delay. However, another reason that we want the assessment evidence scanned is to help us meet our obligations to keep secure records. In the past, there have been situations where student evidence has been lost, either by going missing in the post or through natural disaster. There have also been situations where RTOs have lost assessment evidence after mice got into their storage facilities. In 2022, the regulator issued guidance for RTOs, reminding them that the RTO is required to retain records in a secure manner that safeguards those records against unauthorised access, fire, flood, termites or any other pest, and which ensures that copies of records can be produced if the originals are destroyed or inaccessible. The third frequently asked question is, can I submit a stat dec in relation to missing assessment evidence? The short answer is possibly not. When the regulator issued its guidance, it stated that the retained evidence needs to have enough detail to demonstrate the assessor's judgment of the student's performance against the standards required. It's very difficult for us to capture this information with a statutory declaration. The final frequently asked question is, if a piece of assessment evidence is missing, can't I just remap what is missing to other places in the assessments? The answer is that really depends on the individual unit and the individual assessments. To explain more, let's first look at the difference between knowledge and skills. The following video shows a scene from the television series Big Bang Theory. If you're not familiar with that show, the three characters on screen each have a PhD in physics. Their friend, Howard Wolowitz, is an engineer who has recently been working on the Mars rover project. Wolowitz affectionately refers to the Mars rover as Monty, and he has brought Monty home from work. At the time of this scene, Wolowitz is not in the room, and one of the physicists has come up with the idea of modifying Monty.
You are overlooking the fact that we now know what we're up against, and we can modify Monty so that he's prepared.
You want to prepare him? Install a bladder and a pair of shorts so he can wet himself.
Excuse me, but how are we going to make any modifications without Wolowitz? Have you heard from Penny yet?
Not yet.
Have faith, gentlemen. We don't need Wolowitz. Engineering is merely the slow younger brother of physics. Watch and learn. Do either of you know how to open the toolbox?
This video is a great example of the difference between skills and knowledge, because although Sheldon Cooper has a lot of knowledge, he does not have the skills to fix the Mars rover. In fact, he can't even open the toolbox. In vocational training, skills and knowledge are both considered equally important because employers need graduates with the necessary skills to complete their work, but also with the necessary knowledge to ensure that quality and safety benchmarks are consistently met. Generally speaking, skills will be demonstrated by doing, whereas knowledge will be demonstrated by asking questions. It's usually very difficult to assess a skill with a knowledge question. For example, in the Rescue Operations Unit Performance Criteria 2.6, casualties at scene are identified, reported to supervisor, and action is taken as directed. Participating in a rescue scenario would allow us to collect evidence that the student has these 3 skills. It would be difficult for us to do that on a computer by asking the student questions. Of course, the same thing could also apply in reverse. The knowledge evidence requirements in this unit state that students must demonstrate knowledge of the capabilities and limitations of rescue equipment and casualty handling techniques. Whilst answering these questions on a computer allows us to assess this knowledge very easily, it may not necessarily have been assessed during the rescue scenario unless you verbally questioned the students and recorded their answers during the rescue assessment. In this module, you have learned that a mapping document contains 3 tables where we map all requirements of the unit against the assessments so that we can demonstrate that a student has been assessed as competent in all aspects of the unit. If we do not receive all pieces of student assessment evidence, then we cannot issue the Statement of Attainment. If we were to issue the Statement of Attainment with assessment evidence missing, then the regulator may later cancel the Statement of Attainment, require us to reassess students, and they may also issue sanctions against us. Another potential consequence of not retaining all of a student's assessment evidence is that later on you may have difficulty justifying your assessment decision in the coroner's court or in other formal hearings in the event that there's been a death or serious incident. You can find a list of all assessment evidence required in the current TAS, and you should use this as a checklist when you are preparing to send the student's assessment evidence to us. Assessment evidence must be scanned and sent to us electronically rather than by post, since we only have 30 days to issue the Statement of Attainment, and also because we are required to keep our records secure to prevent them from being lost or destroyed. Using a statutory declaration to account for missing assessment evidence may not meet the requirements of the federal regulator to demonstrate in detail how the student was deemed competent in all aspects of the unit of competency. And it may not be possible to map missing assessment items to other sections of the assessment, particularly if you're trying to cross-map between knowledge and skills. If you have any questions about assessment evidence, please contact us directly.